Well, welcome back. There seem to be new people here, so I want to sort of reset what I'm doing here. These videos I'm doing on YouTube have come out of a class I developed when I worked at Funko, which began with a three-part drawing fundamentals. Then it evolved into the studies of different artists and techniques, and I would refer back to the fundamentals. I have not yet put the fundamentals up on YouTube, but I'm going to refer back to them. Also, I need to reset the drinking game. If you're playing the drinking game, you need to take a drink when I say the word ellipses or when I say that I worked at Disney. That said, when I worked at Disney, one of the great aspects of that job was the continuing education internal to the company. I worked in consumer products. I was not an animator. I was hired as a graphic designer, and because I could draw, I took their internal classes and eventually was a character artist. I became a character art manager. So I am not a great character artist, but I learned from great character artists, and I am a humble servant passing the torch of this knowledge to you. What I learned from these guys, I was able to attend, they called them chalk talks, where different lead animators would school their teams on how to do characters. For Hercules, I saw a chalk talk by Andreas Deha and Eric Goldberg, who animated Phil, and earlier the genie in Aladdin. I'm bringing to you the lessons I learned. And in my opinion, successful character art comes down to three main components: line of action, silhouette, and acting. Line of action. This is a famous exercise for Disney animators, the flour sack test, where you take a half-filled sack of flour and you try to get it to read emotion using a line of action and just a body mass, not much else. This exercise was used in animating the character of the magic carpet in Aladdin. Silhouette, pretty obvious. When a character is doing something, think about, first off, how the character is doing it to read clearly. Also, where do you put the camera? This guy lighting a pipe, you want to show that from the side. So the hands are out there, you can see the silhouette of the pipe. A mistake a lot of illustrators make is to get the hands across the body, everything's all muddy, there's no silhouette. Look at how clearly all these read with no detail in them. And then acting is the third thing. Whatever that character has, whatever things they have on their face, how do you get the emotion across? As I go through Bruce Timm's Mad Love, I'm going to refer back to these three principles over and over again because he uses these so effectively. But before I get to that, a plug.
If you want to support my channel, the best way is to buy my books. Larry Gets Lost children's books. Larry's probably been lost in your town. You can buy them wherever books are sold or directly from my publisher, Sasquatch Books. And my Canadian books are available through my Canadian publisher, birdhousekids.com.
So I'm going to be referring to this book. There's some great interviews in here discussing Batman the Animated Series and the creation of this book, Mad Love. But there's a great section at the beginning here where Bruce Timm talks about his influences. I just wanted to go over this briefly. It's a real murderer's row of excellent artists. He has really interesting things to say about them. Jack Kirby, obviously, you're probably familiar with, but in the 70s, he left Marvel Comics, where he'd created most of the Marvel Universe, and he went to DC, and his style became much more cartoony and abstract, like these strange knuckles and fingers are trademark of his. Bruce didn't really like it at first, and then it sort of grew on him, and I think that's true of a lot of people. This period of Jack Kirby's career was not highly regarded at the time. It's, in retrospect, become much more fondly thought of. Harvey Kurtzman, sort of the creative lead in the early years of Mad Magazine, did a lot of really realistic war comics, but even though they were realistic, he would use the language cartooning. This is basically a hand-to-hand combat. This guy's drowning another man, and look at how the limbs are just these curved lines of motion. There's almost no real anatomy in it. You can see the Kurtzman influence later in Mad Love. And then, of course, Alex Toth, awesome illustrator. But Timm says something very interesting about Toth that I've kind of felt for a while. He's really one of the greatest illustrators who ever put pen to paper, but he did all this animation design for Hanna-Barbera in the 70s, and it wasn't very suited to animation design. They were great drawings, but they weren't really good for what they were being used for. Bruce was developing Batman the Animated Series. He was looking at Toth's model sheets for Hanna-Barbera. They weren't very helpful to me. When I started looking at them, I realized that even in his simplest animation drawings, some of the characters would be really stylized and cartoony, but his human being figures are just like his comic book figures. They've got so many subtleties to them. He didn't exaggerate. His animation models really aren't made for animation. Everybody may think they are, and even he may have thought so, and animation historians may look back with fond memories on the Toth-designed Hanna-Barbera shows, but there's a whole lot of subtleties in those shapes. Space Ghost's head is a tricky shape to draw. It's not a straight against curve, it's a whole lot of curves that intersect, and if you get one of them off, it doesn't look like Space Ghost. So he said, I was trying to go for something that looked like Space Ghost felt, because Toth was just too hard to manage. John Buscema, I consider the author of the How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, one of my favorite beginning drawing books. And then Wally Wood, probably my all-time favorite artist, master of all sorts of forms of illustration. Frank Frazetta, Dan DeCarlo, the Archie Good Girl artist, and then Jim Steranko, a real innovator in the late 60s, early 70s comics. Batman the Animated Series, really a seminal piece of TV animation, and I'm going to before I get into Mad Love, I'm going to talk about Bruce Timm's background a little bit before Batman and how it came to be in the context. Ralph Bakshi was a producer on Mighty Mouse. The director for season 1 was mostly John Kricfalusi, and he was a madman and a genius. And so Bruce Timm was working with John Kay on Mighty Mouse, and he was really he was drinking the Kool-Aid. He was buying into John's vision of animation. He said the best part of the job was every Friday, everybody would go to John's house after work and just drink and talk about animation theory. And so Kricfalusi was really starting a movement in animation. So this is 1990. Disney has stayed far away from TV animation because their value has always been in quality animation, and TV animation, especially in the 70s and 80s, was just garbage. Well, they came in the 90s. I think it was part of cable TV creating more avenues of distribution. And so Disney kind of came in and did larger budgeted TV animation. Overseas animation gotten better, so they were doing animation they weren't embarrassed to put their logo on. And it was kind of raising the level all around town. Warner Brothers started up Tiny Toons under Steven Spielberg. You know, not quite what the old Looney Tunes were, but better than TV animation at the time. So the level of TV animation is beginning to rise. And Bruce Timm is over at Warner Brothers working on Tiny Toons. Warner Brothers owns DC. So in 91, this is really the big bang, is Ren and Stimpy. Nickelodeon is going to start doing its original stuff. It does a series of 3 Nicktoons, I believe. Ren and Stimpy is one of them. It explodes. It is a phenomenon. It's difficult to overstate. At Warner Brothers, Bruce Timm hears that they're considering a Batman series, and he's been a Batman fanboy since he was a kid. And he's been around long enough to know how it should be approached. And he's got that sort of Kricfalusi craziness on wanting to do a great product. He also understands in the design of the characters. Remember his criticism of Toth. An animated character should look good while it's moving. And when it's not moving, it should maybe even read a little bit too simple because it's not meant to not move, if that makes sense. And so he brings all this knowledge to his dream project, and he just happens to be in the right place at the right time. He does some character designs, and he basically gets the job. Now, Mad Love. Batman the Animated Series comes out. It's a huge hit, but these guys are working night and day on these things because of the level of quality. So he gets a break, and Paul Dini, the writer, comes up with this idea for Harley Quinn's origin story. DC buys it as a 64-page book. The reason I'm stressing this is because Bruce Timm at this point has been working on the animated series for a year and a half. He's designed these characters, most of them. He's drawn them probably tens of thousands of times. He's one of the industry's best storyboard artists. he's in his zone, right? He doesn't even have to think about these characters. I talked about Eric Goldberg earlier. I went to a Chalk Talk where he was talking about Phil, and one of the animators says, "Well, what would happen to Phil's eyebrows if he was surprised?" And it was to watch him draw it. You could see that Eric didn't even think for a minute about the anatomy of the face. He thought about the emotion, and the pencil would do the acting, and then he would sort of watch the pencil to see what, you know what I mean? Like he's been doing it so long that the pencil is acting on its own. Well, that's where Bruce Timm was at the point he did this book, with one exception. He had never done a comic book before. And he really admired the innovative panel designs of Neil Adams and those guys, but he was starting to panic. He didn't want to blow his bucket list thing, and I think he was reading some Keith Giffen, who was using the 9-panel grid, much like a lot of artists, but Steve Ditko would use. And he realized that the 9-panel grid, by sort of removing all the variations of layout, freed him to work within the constraints to think as a storyboard artist. And so he used the 9-panel grid for that reason. And he made a lot of choices it was a struggle to get this done in time. And because he was in the zone and the speed, there's almost like a Zen beauty and elegance to this. He's using the 9-panel grid, but he's actually even innovative in how he's using it, where he's only keeping the 2 corners on this left page to give himself room for this nice diagonal splash. Also, look at the Z pattern. This is he admits that this is a kind of a conflict between a storyboard artist and a comic book artist, in that in storyboarding for motion pictures, television, you never want to violate the 180 rule, taking a character from one side to the other. However, in comics, it doesn't really matter as much. It's more important to keep the eyes moving. He admits he had some trouble with that as a storyboard artist adapting. So this was there was a lot of back and forth between Bruce Timm and DC about how to show Harley Quinn in a see-through nightie, and do the compromise here, that little line showing her silhouette, but the coloring doesn't go too far. Now think about this in the script. Harley Quinn's coming in, Joker is distracted and working. This staircase is a complete contrivance, an invention by Bruce. Power dynamic between the 2 characters. This frame here is famously a censored frame. You can Google it for the sex joke. Very sad Joker. How simple lips and mouth, like the comedy and tragedy match. Very broad character. You see how great his the mood, just all sweetness here, and then explosive anger. Line of, he's almost literally, and even though the line of action fly off that the large motion is, and the passivity space between the 2 characters, preserving the passive innocence on her face. Very low, so the camera is almost on the floor to keep your camera up and giving them nice silhouettes. Also, really, it's kind of focusing on her silhouette. And you'll notice the difference in the Joker and Batman. Joker are these kind of S curves, sweeping things, a pointy chin. Batman is fair, a block, like a plastic bulldozer. There's like a triangle. Really nice staging here. That negative space. This looks like Barrymore. Really broad silhouette here. Silhouettes. And look at how much story he's dominating. Really strong, almost straight line top of her. She's like trying to slay. Very nice dynamic. And again, letting everything, his hand, that pointed finger, her passive, the passive, her fingers. That I love that little eye popping. Just to see more. Look at that kind of energy, floating in rage. This the acid, is like the relation of his rage across the room. Wow, that's just, and this is not a guy who's been holding. Really nice 1-2 here. You see his face, the reaction. He's holding reverse down angle. What's he looking at? This is something. It's really the 9-panel grid works well for the animation, but using the rhythm of the panels to these beautiful acting poses, silhouette, and then making him small and lonely in that frame. It's just amazing. You're playing with the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Blank Harley. So it's almost like a train. Now this, 1, 2, 3, image. So it's Harley's that is represented in the time. And a funny story moment. So down this very Freud tunnel, dark core of her soul, where she comes to the realization that the Joker is in love with Batman and she can never have him until she's 20. Of Harley, and there's some really beautiful storytelling in this. So Quinzel is the Joker's, in his Hannibal Lecter sort of cell with the glass. Now we know that he's basically gonna turn her. So look at the reflection of her innocent self, looking back. She's looking at the Joker. That's very clever staging for what is going to happen. You can see a lot of times Tim, how he's using his percentage of frames to weight the importance of something. So he used 6 frames for that image. And there's a really interesting rhythm in these too. 1, 2, 3, bump, bump, bump. Joker, Harley, Harley. Small, close, close. Small, close, close. So again, wonderful broad acting in the Joker. This is his love bombing, I think you call that, with narcissistic personality disorder. Zooming in on Harleen still, but you see a twinkle in her eye. Now we go to look how he has staged the sessions in a black room. The black room isolates these characters, or the black space, but also sort of implies we're now inside the minds of these two characters. Now watch what happens. We go through 2 pages. We're still in that blackness. So the Joker's pouring it on. He's charming her, right? Now, look what has happened. They've changed places. So that the transition happened in this mind space of the two of them. Then, this is pretty funny. She witnesses the Joker getting rounded up. So, brilliant wordless sequence showing how, in her eyes, Batman is a fascist bully and the Joker is just this poor clown. See, he's all battered up. Batman doesn't know what's going on. He thinks he's the good guy. She's dragged away. He's dragged away. She's screaming. She visits him. He's in the loony bin. She drives away, breaks into a costume shop, drives back. Look at this wonderful staging. And the car, notice, not only is it vertically stacked, so you have the car in the foreground and the destination in the background and the road between, but look how the car is off the ground to show the speed. Here she is in her costume. Boom, 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 ready for the reveal. Fully formed Harley Quinn. Then the escape, and look at it. Look at that great shot. The crazy mobile. And all 9 frames for one shot. He's furious. So look at the acting in the postures of these two characters. So her hand is to her face, her eyes are wide, her mouth is small, she's looking out of the corner of her eye. She couldn't be more innocent. She has no idea what's happening. She's all internal and timid, and he is exploding like a starfish. His limbs are headed out in every direction. Even his eyes are kind of exploding out like that. Really, really beautiful confrontation. And again, look at the difference in the postures. This is not going to go well when she runs into him. Okay, I think you see very clearly the Kurtzman influence. If you remember those frames from Corpse on the Engine where the man is, where the fight is happening. Look at this. There's barely a bone in that body. It's just that wonderful circular line of action. And it's like you can feel the slipping. He's going one way, then the other. But also, look at every limb is pulled away from the mass so that they all read, right? And then the fissure out there. So no internal detail required. The whole story is sold in those 2 frames. Also, just some really wonderful frame-to-frame animation up here. So Batman's jumping, lands. So imagine trying to draw this. Lands on his toes, flexed, knees together, hands tied behind his back. Oh, spring. Nice straight line of action. Coil, spring, flexed out. Really, really beautiful drawings. Look at that. That's nice. And then the one scene divided in 3. Running across. The Joker's here stretched out. Legs stretched out almost to his fullest, and then all coiled. In animation, it's called like an antic, where you coil up to sell the motion that's about to occur. Just really. So it's funny to watch Tim as he approaches the climax to try and exaggerate more and more because he's done so much great work in the beginning. So it just gets more and more explosive. That line of action and also that perspective. In this, look at that beautiful little negative space. And look at the difference in shape of those 2 faces. That jagged downward spike, those square with the round. Really nice action here to show that he's just getting knocked out of the page into your lap. And then back here, this is just about to close up a couple cover designs, which just show wonderful Bruce Timm artwork. Look at how the Joker almost isn't a human being. I imagine there was I think this is for the Batman Adventures. There's probably some big logo there. So you see he's using that logo space, that dead space where the logo is, to create the volume for the Joker. So it doesn't even have to get into your image space, and yet the Joker is the dominant figure in that. And look at that. Beautiful. Running away in perspective. That's pretty tough. So we're kind of, see as she kind of gets smaller back there. Really nice work. Strong, straight line of action. And then this, very problematic behavior. But look at the physical acting in the postures of these two characters. So this line of action from the, look at that. It's like coming at you like a like an axe, and then that big spiky nose. He's like a human arrow, and then Harley is everything else. She's stretching backwards away from it. Even her, look at her mouth straining out that way. Let's get me away from this guy. Anyway, so that is Bruce Timm's Masterclass, Mad Love. So that's it for this week. I will see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks a lot, everybody.